Hi everyone, welcome to Living La Vita Loca podcast, a retro gaming podcast for some of your retro gaming needs. My name is Fazz.
And this is The Rich.
Yes, there we go. Brilliant. That's I still haven't worked out which one I like the most out of all your nicknames.
Yeah, it's all right. I quite like Mineral Rich.
Okay, well, yeah, that's just like classy, isn't it? Like, I like that one.
It is
like,
quite classy.
I still like rich in gravy. Is it that?
Rich in fatty acids.
That's concerning. You're okay?
Yeah.
Most weeks, yeah, give or take.
Yeah. Cool. Broadly okay.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Speaking of being okay, we're going back in time a little bit to retro gaming times of when I would think in my experience of life that I would class this as my sort of first era of video gaming that I remember vividly enough. Like, so I think I've said on the podcast before, we used to have a Commodore, I think, in my house. Is it the C64? Is that the name of it? Yeah.
There is a thing called a C64.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what we used to have. But then I remember that barely. But what I remember is my Sega Mega Drive and of the era of the Sega Mega Drive, or the Genesis, if you will, and also the SNES, would it be? Really kind of the mixing time of those ones, really?
Yeah.
SNES, maybe?
Yeah, SNES.
I was always shocked, whenever I read Retro Gamer, I'm always shocked how long the SNES lasted.
Yeah,
like, it's almost like...
legs.
Yeah, I'm sure it was was it still around in like 97 or something like that? Was it still popping games out like?
Yeah, maybe the odd one or two here and there.
And I always get confused when like everyone's like, "Oh, the PlayStation was out in 1994." I'm like, "What? 94? That is insane!" Like, as I said on the Ape Escape podcast the other week, I think I got one in like 98 or 99 or something like that. It was like wild, but. Game consoles used to take a little while to get going. I guess now is like you don't drop it and then. Well, maybe not. Maybe.
We look at the Switch and
switching out, and even now, actually, I think I'm going to take that comment back because I think about like the Xbox Series X and stuff. Like it was kind of like a COVID affected thing, but that didn't have. It still doesn't have many games that are exclusive to it.
Yeah, and I think generally, and this is very generally, and I hope the internet will correct me, but I think generally consoles nowadays have kind of a longer shelf life than they used to back in the day. Generally,
yeah. It's funny. It is funny because whenever I see, I own a PlayStation 3, and it's very easy to get PlayStation 3 games on eBay, for example, or CEX, or anywhere else, for probably quite relatively cheap. There's not many on there that you go, I'm paying a premium for that, unless it's like an obscure Japanese game and it's sealed new. Like, do you know what I mean? But I can see a time when that will happen at some point for the PlayStation 3. But then I don't know whether or not digital compatibility, backward compatibility, because it feels like that's like the generation of consoles that these consoles and the newest generation get back to easy enough. Like you don't, whereas PS2 and PS1, for example, you don't get back to them as easy. That is unless they were remade, maybe. I'm thinking, for example, Siphon Filter that I hover around on eBay all the time, and fucking one time that one of Siphon Filter 2, a complete copy went for like £1.50, but I was watching it and then I was doing the dishes or something and I didn't get to my phone in time, whereas all the rest of the time they're all like £9, £10, £11 for a complete copy, and it's like, and I don't think that is on the Sony shop. You're more in tune with more modern Sony. I don't know.
My brain's all scrambled on that front because I'm pretty sure you'd be able to pick it up if you were like looking on the Vita store or something, like some weird oddity like that.
So you can still get like the PSP ones and the Dark Mirror. Because my friend who's been on the podcast before, Betty, he showed me actually that on the PS5 store, Dark Mirror, Siphon Filter Dark Mirror, which was a PS2/PSP game, is on the store.
Oh, right.
So. But the originals seem to be harder to get hold of.
Right.
So anyway, back to the story of my life, the PS3 thing. The longevity of games consoles, they probably are getting a little bit longer, aren't they? But you can probably go back and play the last 2, 3 generations a lot easier, I think, than you can the generation we're about to speak to. About, even. What's going on?
The generation we're speaking to.
We should drink more on the podcast because this sober talk is fucking mental. I've had a coffee and it's gone wild. So, we're going to use our PSP and PS Vita, our retro gaming consoles, to retro game today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when I did that Atari compilation all over again.
It is just like that. But a little bit more modern than that.
I mean, I've got even more of a kind of Russian doll situation going on with mine.
Okay.
So I'm using my Vita to play the PSP version of the Mega Drive collection.
My brain
So
just
I'm like
exploded.
emulating an emulator.
Yeah. Say what?
Yeah.
So tell me about your Russian doll and Tatiana. Tell me about her. She's in the corner of the room right now. She's well made. She's a sturdy old bird.
I've actually bought some props with me for this one.
Oh, brilliant. Clang props.
Not quite clang
Like
clang
episode
props,
5 of the
I
podcast,
don't
maybe?
know.
Our second most listened to episode. Clang props. Maybe episode 3. The one with the cod blops.
Fucking cod blobs.
Cod blops and clang props. So.
When I would go off on one about Call of Duty.
Bring me the same vigour that you brought me for Call of Duty Black Ops.
I wish I could.
Okay.
So the Mega Drive was my first gaming love, right? And
that's fair.
Like it was. I distinctly remember a day with my parents where they said about possibly getting one if you behave, and I did something that meant I didn't get one at the end of the day.
Oh shit!
And I can't remember what it was, but I was proper fucking distraught, right?
Wow.
I learned a lesson that day in how to behave.
Good lesson.
Yeah, well done, Mum and Dad. But I did get one eventually.
Bad lesson. Cave the next day.
I don't know if it was quite the next day. But either way, absolutely loved it. And I still do. And, I was having, one of those passing conversations the other day with somebody. And it was like, actually, is the Mega Drive my favourite console of all time? And it's got more of a claim to that than most, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been playing Mega Drive games for a long time now, and I've got various collections of stuff.
If I was going to dress you up in a costume of a video gaming console, I would dress you up in a Mega Drive.
Yeah, I think it's a good fit.
Yeah. I don't know what the cartridge slot would be, but...
Yeah, it's all right. We'll worry about that a different day. We'll workshop it.
I'm going to workshop that.
So the thing with the Mega Drive, and you saying about, emulating the last generation and all that kind of stuff and that kind of backwards compatibility, the Mega Drive collections are fucking everywhere, right? Like this is a PSP port of one that came out on the PS2. Yeah. There was one on the PS3. Yeah. There was one on the PS4 and the Switch kind of era, and they are all slightly different, but crucially, each generation has included a few more games, and nowadays is probably a bit easier to get hold of, right? Than the PS2/PSP version. Yeah. So straight off the bat, apart from the Mega Drive, considering Sega's rich gaming heritage, have you ever seen any other Sega compilations? Have you ever seen a Game Gear collection or a Master System collection? I see what you mean. Yeah. You might get the odd port of some of their arcade stuff. Yeah. I had to buy a fucking Sega Saturn to play a load of Saturn games. I couldn't play. I mean, they ported some of them to the Xbox 360, right? But they're not easy to come by.
It's not like a Dreamcast thing, is there? Or a Sonic CD.
Sonic CD is one of those ones that you can get hold of a little bit more nowadays because it pops up on Sonic collections. Yeah. Same with some of the Sonic Game Gear games, right? So the most recent Sonic collection has some of those in.
Is that Origins?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
But for things I think the Vita got a Jet Set Radio port and stuff like that, and so there's a couple of bits and bobs. Ikaruga is a good Dreamcast thing.
If I don't regularly do this when we're on the podcast, but I'm going to try and Google. You carry on talking. I am listening. Yeah. How many times Sonic has been re-released into a collection.
Right, so that is a good thing to Google, because the number of times he's popped up, but there's a lot of other Sega stuff that's just like, why they're not making money out of this by just churning out more collections, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
wow, Origin. Oh no, it's expansion pack. I was going to say you can get it cheap on PlayStation, but you can't. There it is.
So
Mega Drive Classic Switch, over 50 games.
So that is a good collection to get, right? But all of this is a really long-winded way of saying that there are ways of playing Mega Drive games that are easier than how I have done it this week. Right?
Okay.
So, like, the Mega Drive Minis are a good example. Like, sure, they're a bit pricey, but for someone like me who has a lot of nostalgia for the console and all that kind of stuff, like, they're a good mix of games and relatively representative of the library, with the exception of, like, sports games, which were really important to them, right? So there are some gaps, basically. And I was mucking about with it. Do you remember when I borrowed your little emulator handheld thing?
Yeah,
I was like,
I remember.
I was a bit coy on details as to why I wanted to borrow it.
What did you do with it?
Well, I wanted to muck about with some Game Gear and Master System games. Because,
right, okay,
like,
cool.
I fancied playing them, and I was like, how? Like, shy of just, downloading them and emulating them and things like that. So this took me on a bit of an odyssey, right?
Okay.
So this little doohickey that I'm waving at you now was...
I didn't expect there to be something new here.
Yeah. It was 20 quid off of eBay, and it's almost kind of Game Gear shaped, but a bit smaller. But it's the At Games arcade thing. It's got a Mega Drive sticker on the back, which is incorrect because it's got about 20 Master System and Game Gear games on it, right? And,
Can I boot this up?
You can. It'll probably make a load of noise and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember how loud it is or isn't. It's not great, right? But it's a slightly unusual take on things.
Yeah,
and there
little,
are,
Can you hear that?
So, some bits and bobs that are a bit more unusual, right?
Yeah.
But that left me with, like, okay, well, how do I play some other Game Gear games, like, officially? And I did some digging.
You go on. You talk. You talk.
And found an actual Game Gear Micro.
What the fuck is that?
I treat myself to a Game Gear Micro. So this is the blue one. It's got Gunstar Heroes. It's got the Game Gear version of Gunstar Heroes on it. It's got Sonic and Tails. And
didn't we just take Gunstar Heroes out of the 10 out of 10 club? So didn't we swap it out for Castlevania?
So it's got four Game Gear games on it, right? And they released 5 of these in total, different colours with a slightly different set of games on each of them, right?
Yeah.
The reason I am bringing all this up is that not only does Sega keep insisting on re-releasing Mega Drive games, it then insists on releasing other parts of its heritage in fucking ridiculous form factors. What? So, like...
I feel like I'm just seeing Rich unravel before me.
The Game Gear Micro is maybe about 4 centimetres tall, if that, and maybe about, 8 wide.
We'll put it up on our Instagram. It's one person will see.
Very, very small, but works, right? And
can I hold that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Gonna boot this up as well. I don't understand. Why have they released this? Like, what is its function? Like, it's actually quite high resolution for such a screen.
It's a lovely screen.
What size?
That's about an inch. So
why have? Right. Okay. How much?
So this is the thing, right? So that.
Oh. Well, that's pretty jazzy.
It's a lovely bit of kit. It's really small though. It needs to be about this sort of size, the size of the At Games thing, which is what, 3-4 times the size.
It's almost as the screen's almost as big as the actual Sega Game Gear console itself, mini.
But the point is that Sega are willing to put out collections of games in weird ways, right? This Sega Mega Drive collection on the PSP feels really fucking lackluster. Like, considering the effort that has gone into the Game Gear Micro and putting it all together and making it into something that I genuinely like as a piece of kit. It's too small, but I like it, right? It needs to be a bit bigger. It needs a bigger collection of games, but, I like the idea.
How much did you pay for it again? Did you say that one?
That was 65 quid. 65 quid. Tragically, I would spend again in a heartbeat.
I mean, it's cool. That isn't it? It's a cool thing to have.
Yeah.
And clearly it's like modern enough to have, you get you what. You can get your phone
Micro
jack
USB.
in there and micro
Yeah.
USB. That's cool. So when's this from? Like, what year was this released?
A couple of years ago.
Oh, right, okay.
Like, it's recent.
It's really quite modern then.
Yeah. So this is it, right? This is what's weird.
It still looks like something you make in the 90s, even now. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I know
but
which is the whole point, but like it's in...
But the fact is that they have released a Mega Drive collection every fucking generation for the
Yeah.
last however many years, and yet the only way you can legally, like, first party purchase
A
Game
Game
Gear
Gear.
games
Is either getting a
in
Game Gear or...
tiny little form factor, or buy a Game Gear that will probably fail because of dodgy capacitors.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, like I've looked at thinking about getting a Game Gear because
Same.
I'm a Sega bitch as well, but not as much as you are. But certainly, it's like you say, it's like battery life and probably not going to work when you get it. So.
You've got to do some repairs and that. So the point is that for all of Sega's weird decisions, like the Game Gear Micro, for them to put out a collection that has some really good games on it, but at the same time, like just some baffling decisions made in this list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Shinobi 3, right?
Mm.
Let's start there. That is a classic. It's great. It's good sort of platforming action. You've got 2 of the Sonic games, so Sonic 1 and 2, which, as someone who really, really likes Sonic 3 and Knuckles, that kind of stings.
Shitty. Like, when's this from again? 2000?
So this is good question.
Because it was
It's
the
about
PSP game.
Yeah, about 2007 for Europe, 2006 for North America.
Okay. So what possible reason? Although, just to come up with my Google research, there's been 8 Sonic compilation games since Sonic 3 was released.
Yeah.
That is in, so, like, that is ridiculous.
You're not
That is-
lacking,
Yeah, no,
basically.
it's mental.
But what's weird, right, is
And
that
that's not including these ones of the Mega Drive collections.
But this collection has Sonic 1 and 2. Crucially, doesn't have Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles or Sonic 3 and Knuckles.
Yes.
But you have Echo the Dolphin, Echo Ties of Time, and Echo Junior.
We know how good they are.
You have Golden Axe 2, and Golden Axe 3. You've got 3 Phantasy Star games. Like, Vectorman 1 and 2, like, it feels weird to have, like, large numbers of sequels. I mean, that's most of that list of games are sequels.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I get if you've got, say, a Blu-ray disc on your PS4 and you can cram basically the entire Mega Drive library into it, like, fill your boots. But on the PSP, where storage is going to be a bit more of a premium, it feels like there are some really odd decisions in the list of games. And then you go to something like the more recent collection. I've got a Mega Drive collection on the Switch where you've got, say, some of the games by Treasure and stuff like that in there that I feel are massively important to the Mega Drive library. I fucking love the stuff that Treasure did. So to have no representation here feels really odd. And, you know, I'm sure there would have been a bunch of licensing considerations at the time, like, fine. But, you know...
But it's not as if they weren't far enough removed from that situation, though. It was still, you know, even if it's, say, 2007, for example, it's still, like, you know, quite a significant amount of time removed from...
Yeah,
you know, like sort of 12, 13, 14 years or whatever.
But I wonder if that was the kind of tail end of Treasure still trying to release their own stuff.
Yeah.
Because they had a couple of bits on, like, the Xbox 360 arcade and stuff like that. So, you know, it might have been commercial things or something like that.
So it almost feels like a lot of these compilations that were released in the mid-2000s were a bit too close to their source material, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. And then you get into, say, with the sports games and stuff like that, like, yeah, they were massively important to the Mega Drive library, but a lot of them were licensed. So, you know, they would have player names and stuff like that. I would say just go in and change them. Yeah. You know, just make them fake names. But that's me. I know a lot of people wouldn't be up for that. But
it worked for Pro Evo for years.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is here is good. There are some good choices in the games list. The emulation, as best as I can tell, works well. There's some nice extras you can unlock. You know, a couple of developer interviews and a couple of games even from like the arcade eras and stuff like that. But yeah, it all just feels a bit. It feels a bit like it falls a bit flat. And the only way, you know, this compilation would work for you, considering that you only have like a couple of save slots per game. In fact, you probably got more than that. I'm probably doing it a bit of a disservice. There's an online multiplayer, or local rather Wi-Fi stuff, but there would have been. Point is, if you're going to play Mega Drive games nowadays, you have a plethora of options that are going to be more accessible than getting a PSP version or getting the PSP version on the Vita.
I think we've got a caveat this episode with so I'll go on to what I'm going to do in a little while, but you know, it's like collections that you kind of they are of a time. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, you know, like, so the ones that are out now will be outdated in 5 years' time. You know, you might get
possibly.
Do you know what I mean? You might get some really good Sega Mega Drive collections in 5 years' time, and it's just like, and so that I wanted to get back onto the Ambernick that you borrowed from me then, and what I bought in, you know, lockdown. So I think I paid £85 for that. Now, whether it is legal or illegal, a console turned up at my house from China after about 8 weeks, and I was a bit sceptical it would turn up, but it did. I was also worried it had COVID on it, but it was all okay. And it turned up with about 1,000 games on there, and some, you know, some AAA games from Game Boy, from Game Boy Advance, from Sega Mega Drive, SNES. And I have only just really recently, since I've become more of a gamer and learning more about retro gaming from you and magazines and books and things, sort of started to access that more and more in terms of what I'm like, oh, I can play this on here or play that on there. And we'll have some games coming up in January that I know that I'm going to use that for. And without that game, like one of those games would cost me about £30 or £40 by itself now. And we've had this conversation before, and we'll have it again and everything like that, but am I wrong doing it that way? That is in because the emulation's fine, I'm playing the game, I'm keeping it alive, that is in, and I'm getting a lot of value for money. Like, is there any, you know, like, whereas actually the right way, in inverted commas, I'm doing that with my hands right now, would be to buy a compilation or to buy the original game and play it on the original sort of, you know, system, or at least get a proper emulation of it.
I mean, I think that you're not wrong. Like, I think it's. I kind of hit on it a little bit when I was talking about hacking the PlayStation TV, so that I could actually play stuff that's listed on its own fucking store. Like, if the companies that own the IPs or the licenses and all that kind of stuff are willing to put them out, I am willing to buy them. If they're not, what other option do you have? And I think it's one of those things where I think there is definitely a preservation argument to be had, especially, you know, hardware will fail. You know, we were just talking about Game Gears, you know,
it's true,
failing, and sure, you can repair them and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately it means that however many were sold originally, you know, that's still going to be, you know, a shrinking number potentially, and all this kind of stuff. So it is a grey area, and there is definitely a conversation to be had. If Sega put out a Game Gear and Master System collection on the Switch tomorrow, I would be buying it in a fucking heartbeat. But they haven't, and so here I am weighing up whether or not I'm going to buy an 80 quid Ambernick or I'm going to buy a 20 quid at games thing that's going to do that specific thing off eBay. You know, it's a weird set of situations, and then you have Sega turning out like another set of Mega Drive things. It's like, you've got more than one console, guys. You know, it's a weird one.
But I do think that this is exactly where, looking at the Game Gear Mini that I'm holding in my hands now, this is where you are a gaming collector, and I'm not saying not in a bad way at all, but more of a purist than I am, that I would be like that paying £65 for something that fits in the palm of my hand that has 4 games on there, like, and you're really happy with that, and I'm really sad with that. I love you, and I love doing this podcast with you, but that makes me feel like I don't want that to happen to me.
Yeah, but that's horses for courses, because there are plenty of people that would have bought these just to put them on a shelf.
Yeah,
which I feel
is the other side of it as well.
Yeah, and like I think it looks very, very nice. I really like how it looks. The screen's amazing. I like the weight of it when you've got some batteries in it and all that kind of stuff.
I'm not saying that is it looks wonderful and it's great. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm glad that you're going to use it.
But that's the key word for me, right? Like I've never understood people who get it to just put it on a shelf.
Yeah.
Like, and I've played most of Sonic and Tails on this. I've damn near completed the game. I was going to review that game for this podcast. Or rather, the last one until you mentioned Mario Kart.
Oh, feel really bad now. Why didn't you tell us about Sonic and Tails on the Game Gear? Come on, we've got time.
Well, I still haven't finished the fucking thing.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it doesn't sound great. Come on.
So, Sonic and Tails is a bit of an odd duck.
I can't wait to learn this game. It's weird.
No, but the weird thing about it is that it's all there.
Okay.
Like it's stripped back. It's 8-bit. It's like a console that's half as powerful or whatever. But the component factors are all there. Like there are a couple of cheap deaths and stuff like that. Leaps of faith and things like that. But especially on a Game Gear Micro with save states and stuff like that,
where you leap from half an inch to another half an inch.
Yeah, well, but it's got save states. Yeah. Whereas if you're playing on original hardware, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely eases it. Something like Gunstar Heroes is a bit tricky to get your thumbs around, but not impossible. So yeah, like there are plenty of people that were slagging them off on the internet, like, oh god, how can you play that when it's so small? I find that more comfortable than some controllers I've ever held because it's small enough that you can hold it in your fingertips. Like, obviously, if you're trying to play it with your fucking hands wrapped around it and all that kind of stuff, it's never going to work.
That's true.
But if you play it with your fingertips, and it's small enough to get away with it, that is perfectly serviceable.
Maybe I should dress you as a Sega Game Gear Mini.
Maybe. I mean, I think it's one of those.
Leave much to the imagination.
I think it's one of those. I think the Game Gear is one of those things that if I'd had one at the time, I would have absolutely fucking adored it.
Yeah.
Which is partly why I thought, you know what, it would be fun to try it, right? It would be fun to try it, and that's why I borrowed your Ambinic, and I was like, you know what, it would absolutely do the stuff that I want it to do. The problem was that it did everything. And so it would be doing a bunch of stuff that I just wouldn't need it to do, or want it to do. And then that's when I found the AtGames thing for like 20 quid. I was like, you know what, on a bit of a punt, yeah, let's give it a go. And I enjoyed the Game Gear stuff on there, and I enjoyed the Master System stuff. And I was like, cool, are there any compilations like the Mega Drive collection that I could go and track down? Are there? Fuck. So instead of going in being willing to spend, 50, 60 quid on a compilation, I end up spending the same money on a comically small console.
It's just like, I like that this is, and this will come out in the title of the podcast, try and draw more people in. This is definitely a broader conversation about, we've done a little conversation before about remastering and remaking games and stuff, but compilations and keeping games alive and things, again, we've even touched on that, but like specific compilations and how you do that, it's really good to have this conversation around that.
Yeah, and I really like good compilations. I do. I think there's, I know you've got online stores, I know you've got streaming services and all that kind of stuff. I genuinely think there is still a place in this world for a compilation and collections of stuff. And I think the Switch is actually really, really good for it, or this generation in general. It has been quite good for it, especially with like the Neo Geo stuff as well. And if anything, I would like more consoles to get that kind of compilation treatment.
Yeah.
All that said, the Mega Drive collection on the PSP is not the one you're looking for. Like the library is too narrow. It's going to be too difficult to get hold of compared to just getting it for whatever you're playing on at the moment.
You say that, I see it selling for quite the actual PSP version. You can pick up. In fact, I think I saw it in Sawthorne's Retro Gaming Shop the other day for like £3 or something. So I think you can get it, but like you say, it's not worth.
Yeah. Like it's one of those things that if it's a toss up between the £3 version and you already happen to have a PSP laying around and you want to play some Mega Drive games and you've got nothing else to play,
you guys are out there.
Fill your boots. You will have a lovely time.
Yeah.
If you've got something a bit more up to date, be it PS3, PS4, PS5, and you're willing to spend a little bit more money, get literally any other collection that is out there. So, I mean, for me, I think this is coming out about a 4 out of 10.
Yeah.
Like, I was looking at the scores spreadsheet and saw the Atari collection on there at 6, and I was like, shit, by comparison, I kind of feel like I should bump Atari up to 7.
Yeah.
But
you spoke really positively about it at the time.
Yeah, I think so. I think I was a bit harsh on it. I don't know what our rules are about rejigging scores after the fact, but
yeah,
I'd
I'm not going to allow that.
Yeah, no, I thought you
might.
No,
no, I will. I will allow that. I will allow it.
No,
Yeah,
I'll leave it as is.
It's fine. Well, we can discuss that at the end of the year when we're going to discuss that. And you can reappraise a couple if you like.
The other reason that I'm quite happy to leave it where it is at the moment is I know Atari 50 is a thing where they make it almost more like an interactive documentary. And I think that kind of approach for compilations, like I think there's a really interesting idea there, and I'm really tempted to go pick it up.
Multimedia sort of library scenario.
I think there's something really interesting there. So I'm quite happy to leave the PS Vita collection at 6 out of 10 because I think by the sounds of it there is something out there that.
Let's just clarify that's Atari, by the way. Everyone just still
the Sega Mega Drive one is still very much 4 out of 10. Like that's not going anywhere.
It still feels like 4. Still feels, considering it's not had great love from you there. It sounds like it's still okay-ish. It's still better.
There's still great games. Yeah. Like and it's the score is not a reflection on the games themselves.
Yeah.
It's a reflection on what has come since. And which I know is fucking weird because if I was reviewing it at the time, like you could probably add 2 or 3 to the points quite happily.
Yeah.
But in the cold light of day in 2023, is this going to be the Mega Drive collection that you're playing? Probably not.
Well, it's funny you should say that because I was speaking to my brother-in-law Brad, who's now going to start listening to the podcast because I mentioned in this episode, give him a pop. So he was talking to me last night, and I noticed that he had a PS3 around at his house for my nephew, his son, and himself, and he said that we've been playing the Sega Mega Drive collection that I saw sat on top of the pile, which is the same game as the one that you're talking about, the PS3 version, effectively with a couple of little differences.
No, the PS3 version's got a load more games in it.
Oh, has it? All right,
this is the point. That is interesting. Like, this is the point. Okay. Each of the generations added more games.
I think I've owned both the PS2 and the PS3 versions of this collection. I don't have them either at the moment, but the PS3 one. But I was looking at it, and he was saying that. Just simple things like, Sonic. I used to love Sonic when I was a kid, but actually I'm a bit bored by it now. Like, it's not really my thing. But then he was saying, but Golden Axe, though, we've been playing Golden Axe together and stuff. And it's just like, that's cool. You know what I mean? It's nice, to talk about those kind of things. But, so to be able to relate to each other on those kind of conversations is nice. So, so should we go into my collection?
Yeah.
A bit of a different sort of odd twist in a way that mine covers 2 consoles, but it covers a brand. And I am, if anything, you can see through me like a stick of rock, like we've talked about before. And if you split me open, I would say EA. I would say Electronic Arts in the middle of me. And I would paid handsomely for my services to EA. I didn't, before we started doing this, project, if you will. Like, as in, I didn't know how much EA played, but I do. It seems so. I love it to bits. And I picked up the PSP compilation EA Replay. Now. It's probably the second most expensive. This is not saying anything. It's not like I'm a collector or anything like that. It's like £11 or something like that. The second most expensive thing I own on PSP, I think. I don't know what I expected when I picked it up, but there's 12 games of either their SNES or Mega Drive / Genesis, I guess, iteration of even some older games as well, which is all like PC games and things. So it's from 1990 to 1995. You got save states, so immediately it picks up a point on the arbitrary rule score because it's retro gaming where I can save it and be able to enjoy it more. And I feel like just as a general rule, like just because games back in ye olden days and things didn't have save states, I'm sure if we had enough memory to do so, it definitely would have been a thing that games could have done. Like, as in, so I hate when people are like, oh, it's not, you try and play it all the way through in one sitting and stuff, that's the proper way of doing it. And I'm like, nobody would have wanted that if they, it's just like, if your house burns down, do it properly, like, as in, no,
like, house better.
Do you know what I mean? It's just, like,
get good at house.
That was the worst example I could think of in the moment, but I'll come back to that. So there's 12 games, and again, you get the same sort of experience that you've had where you actually, of those games, there are 5 that is in sort of game A and then game B, and then, so for example, Desert Strike is on there and Jungle Strike, so you get the sequel, but you don't get Urban Strike, for example. I think that was maybe PS1. I can't remember now. There's like 4 Strike games, and then you get all 3 Road Rashes. Like, you need 1 Road Rash. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, it should just have the best Road Rash on there. Like, as in, it shouldn't be, if that's 2 or 3, then put it on there. If it's 1, leave it on there. 2 Wing Commander games, like 1 which is just normal Wing Commander and 1 that's Secret Missions. Other games that I've never heard of or played in my entire life, but I decided I would play this time round. I'm going to be honest, I've never played Mutant League Football, which man. I know that you would probably look at me in shame, but
I was just saying about Mega Drive compilations and not having sports games and stuff like that. Yeah. Mutant League Football is a fucking cert. Like, why is that not on any of these collections apart from this one?
But I wonder if that is a...
it's an EA thing.
Yeah, maybe it's so EA screwing everyone over once more.
Although on the second Mega Drive Mini, they do have Desert Strike.
Yeah, I mean,
so like it could have been done.
Yeah, of course it could have been done. And Syndicate, I'd never played Syndicate before. Apparently, that
rings a bell.
So something called Haunting Poltergeist, as well, and a game that is just titled B.O. Bob, I think it is. And then one called Budokan. So I'm going to quickly just shoot through these because you don't need to know every single part of these games. I'm not going to do the whole one-word situation that you did with your Atari. But I started off with what I knew, Desert Strike. And I was surprised to hear that was, like, at that time when it came out on the Sega, was the fastest selling Sega game, like, is in which is like at that time, which is crazy. It was like in and that was, I think it was 1990, I think it was, or something. 1992 it was, right? Because the Gulf War was 1990, so it was 2 years after that. So really capitalising on
respectful that. Distance. Good.
But I love it though, like, the bad guy, he's the madman, and it's just like literally just looks like Saddam Hussein is in the background. But yeah, Desert Strike, really fond memories of actually playing that, and the cartridge where you see the little EA yellow kind of bit in it. Played the shit out of Desert Strike, and weirdly enough, that was one of those games that was a really, really hard game when I was a kid, but because I didn't have many games, and I really enjoyed the concept of it, even though you couldn't get save states, I think I've mentioned this in the podcast before, maybe, that was one game that I actually completed, but I definitely had to, like, leave the console on overnight. Like, I had to, like, ask my dad to come in and help me on, like, the 4th level. Where you've got to take out, like, the bombing plane at the end or something like that. You've got to, like, and when I replayed this, it's super fucking hard.
I was going to say, I never got that far.
So hard, Desert Strike. Like, and Jungle Strike, I played that, and that's a little bit easier. But Desert Strike, my word, like, so just the little general fucking grunt soldiers that are kicking about with their shitty little machine guns. You stay in front of that for a little while, like for a tiny second. You just the sound effect when you crash your helicopter. When your helicopter, I love it. Like, it's so much fun. And, like, you get hit by, like, a Hellfire missile from one of those weird little Dalek-looking fuckers that are in the airport, blowing your head off. Like, get hit by one of them. That's it straight away. Boop, boop, boop. Warning, low armor. You're like, ah! But the constraints of that game, it is, and the controls are difficult, but they've always been difficult. Like with Desert Strike, that is in. So like it doesn't, it is emulated extremely well from the Sega game to the PSP. So I had real fun playing that for like sort of about an hour and kind of like, getting through the first level and stuff. And I was like, oh, I could do this. And then like, it actually gives you this compilation, gives you tips and hints sort of in the actual pause menu, sort of tell you, like little things like which you know anyway from being a hardened Desert Striker. That is in like, everyone knows that your helicopter doesn't use fuel over the sea, dickhead. So that's like simple science. But little things like that. So actually it was, it's nice to kind of like sort of see things here. Like I wouldn't have remembered that, and it told me, I was like, oh great, well, that's actually really helped me out. Well done, EA Replay. And so Jungle Strike, great as well, and really fun. And I never had Jungle Strike, weirdly. I never kind of converted and got that game after that. I think I just played Desert Strike just constantly and never got like the sequel. But so I had a good time playing that for an hour as well, because I was like, oh, yeah, I get to play the sequel. And I've never had that before. Mutant League Football. So like I said, I'd never played that before. I've put... Why do I ever need to play any other American football game ever?
Exactly, apart from Tecmo Bowl. But yes,
but it's
exactly.
pretty much the same game. Like, it's very much the same game as the first iteration of John Madden Football that I had on the Sega Mega Drive as well, on Genesis.
Same engine, maybe?
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be the exact same engine. Like, all they've done is basically change the sprites to little mutants. The only thing that was like, the music's great and the so I always say the vibe. The best way to describe it is brilliant. It's a little bit of a washout colour-wise. Actually, it's a lot less colourful than Madden, but generally, what a great game! That's what I want from my American football games. And it has everything you need on the screen at all times. That is in all the options and everything like that. The simplicity of the buttons, and I've bemoaned Madden before where it's like, you've got to hold triangle for a hard catch or whatever and shit. I'm just like, no, just throw the ball and catch the ball.
Let's bribe the referee and kick the shit out of it. It's great.
That's really, what's not to love about that game. Yep. So, I'm starting strong here and it gets weaker.
Right,
okay.
Noted.
Sorry, just totally. Road Rash. Fond memories of Road Rash. When you go back and play any Road Rash, I played all three of them for a little bit. They're the most basic, simple games. They have nothing going on. Like, as in the concept of taking out public enemy number one with a chain to his face, still hugely satisfying. As in Slater, booting Slater off his bike at the start. But the problem with this on the compilation is that they've taken the fucking music out of this. I don't know why. Some of the music in Road Rash is like the best part of it, and they've changed it to just a generic looping track.
I wonder if it was a bit close to an actual track.
It must be something. And it honestly drops the experience of those games massively. And also, you look back at it and go, oh, Road Rash is brilliant. If it's a good emulation, Road Rash was shit. Just you remember it quite fondly, I think. So other games on there, and I'm just going to quickly shoot from my notes for these. It's the easiest thing to do. Syndicate. It just felt unplayable without instructions. I had no idea what was going on. It looked very nice though, and again, the emulation seemed very strong. Apparently, that was better on the PC. I read in one of the reviews of this,
like an RPG type
thing. You like remember Cannon Fodder? You're a team of four, and you move around in like a team of four together.
Oh right, okay.
But understanding what to do without the instructions, and I had to look them up. I basically ran out of bullets within a second, and then I just died, and I was like, oh shit. But it just felt very clunky. It didn't and what I noticed with this was that, and I'm going to be honest, I read up about this, was that actually these versions, like the SNES and Genesis versions, especially the SNES versions of some of the games that were released on like PC at the time, were really poor and really poorly reviewed. So it's why have they then ported them a bit? Port the original
preservation.
But it's just port the better ones. Haunting Poltergeist.
I've nearly picked this up on the Mega Drive a couple of times.
Quite fun. A bit weird. Like, isn't kind of cool.
Possess items or something.
Yeah,
people in a room.
Yeah. So and like the people in the first level that you like sort of trying to freak out is like a mobster and his family, like, and you possess items and you do weird stuff, and it's just like, and the animation's pretty cool, like, isn't it? So you'll just press B or something, and you'll like go into his motorbike and start freaking his motorbike out, or like blood will start dripping from the ceiling and stuff. I don't know what was happening. I don't know what was going on. I was enjoying myself for a little bit of time, but that is exactly what I was doing. Like, I mean, like, if I even went another minute longer, I'd have been like, "What? I don't need any more time."
We're done here.
Yeah, I can't believe this is an actual game at some point. Like, as part of a 12-game package. Like, fair enough. Wing Commander and Secret Missions. So, remember when Aaron came on the podcast a few weeks ago and said he absolutely loved Wing Commander on the PC, I think it was. This version, this is a SNES version, I've never seen a game looking so old. Like, I just think that some old games are now just unplayable. This was unplayable. Like, it wasn't as if it was like, you kind of get the games where you get the wireframing of, and that's kind of the first FPS's originations and things, and, where you might get sort of your asteroids and things. Excuse me. And it's so simple, but you know what's going on. Like your Star Wars fighter that you've got an arcade club, for example, and it's just wireframe, but you know what's going on.
Yeah.
This is kind of like where it got to the point where it was almost pre-PS1 with its sort of like 3D graphics and things and trying to get it in there, but too far removed from the wireframing. And it looks like you're playing like coffee granules. Like, it looks like I'm just looking at the outside of a graveler. I don't really know. Like, I can't see. I cannot physically see what I'm meant to be doing. And I was on a PSP screen as well. I'm like, and considering so far, everything I've spoke about has been emulated and looked really good.
Yeah.
It's just unplayable. And I feel like this is just one of those games that, especially of this port of the NES version or the SNES version or whatever it was, that is in, it's just, yeah, I feel like this game is it's just gone. Like you can't play it anymore because it just is too hard to graphically get your brain around. It
needs a little bit of spit and polish.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, it needs work if you want to bring it back into any sort of, I mean, I know we're talking about an emulation that came out, sort of 13, 14 years ago now, but it's my word, like, isn't So last couple, B.O.B. So that was quite a fun platformer. You're kind of like a weird alien taking on some robots and stuff, and a bit James Pondy. Like you kind of move around levels a bit, and I'd say it's just a fun little platformer. And I spent a bit of time with that, and no problem with that at all. That you could see what was going on. The buttons made sense. You got like a little ray gun and stuff. You grab things on the ceiling to move along, and that was quite serviceable.
Nice.
And then there was a game called Budokan, which is a cool little martial arts competition game that almost felt a bit like Olympic gold or track and field, but for meditative martial arts / then karate. Again, needed instructions because I had no idea what I was doing. But the vibe of it, like the feel of it, was like, oh, this feels like a clever little thing. You're kind of moving around a dojo to do little, like, different little events, and then you fight in little sort of, fights to kind of move up effectively. It didn't tell you if you're in a league or anything like that. It's just like, the idea of it and the vibe of it was really cool. But actually playing it was really cumbersome. I was like, I wanted to live in the world, but I was like, but I didn't know how to. I liken this in my notes to visiting a ship museum.
Right.
So the cafe is nice. There's a couple of cool exhibits in there, but mostly I'm bored. I'm in an old Victorian house. There's just random shit in different rooms that I'm like, oh, an old chest of drawers or, an old mirror. I'm like, what am I even looking at here? Why am I here? Oh, this bit's pretty cool. Oh, I had a great, cream tea over here. But generally, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just whiling away time. That is and like we've mentioned previously, and it just falls under the same sort of umbrella. I'm sure that, well, I'm not sure, and that's probably why this is a bit more of a costly expense. I don't think there is many EA replay of all these games compilations,
No.
but some of them will have popped up, like you said, Desert Strike has and things. But I don't think A, because a lot of the games are obscure, but B, also just I don't think there's any sort of desire to have them nowadays, really.
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame that they haven't done stuff like this, because I know like Rare Replay and stuff like that did really well, and like would be the main reason I would buy an Xbox nowadays is to play that.
Well, it's on Game Pass as well, so it's kind of free. Not really, but you know what I mean. Like, in my brain, Game Pass is free because it comes out as a direct debit.
But between that and like I was saying about the Neo Geo collections, and I know there's like a Blizzard collection and like Taito and stuff like that. Like, it would be great if more companies did this.
Yeah.
More, especially ones like EA, where they've been going donkey's years.
Yeah.
Like, use it. And like, I just looked, and like Haunting, starring Poltergeist, on eBay is £35.
Wow.
Cartridge only for the Mega Drive. So like, you know, I would happily bet that people like myself would look at a list of EA's games, if that's on there, and go like, oh yeah, sure, like it's cheaper than buying the cartridge, like sign me up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a shame they're not doing it. But...
Yeah. So I give this 5 out of 10. You know, just a couple of good things on there. Like I say, the Strike games are great. Mutant League Football, best American football game ever made. It seems
that's
to
a
me.
Conversation to be had.
And and a couple of weird obscure games that were quite fun to live in for about 10 minutes, but I was like, also like, well, I don't need to be on here. But yeah, also a lot of just things that I can't even see anymore. That isn't like, they feel like they're in a different dimension from what I am. And I'm like, at one point somebody played these and I feel bad for them. Like, you know, like it's like, you know, back, 700 years ago you had to deal with the plague. 30 years ago you had to deal with Wing Commander. It's just what it is. What it is. So yeah, 5 out of 10. And do I recommend anybody who has a PSP or retro games on a PSP to have this collection, to play the 4 or 5 games out of 12 that are worth it? If you can pick this up for £7 or £8, and that's your interest, I would do it, because it doesn't feel like it's that often to pick it up. But you don't feel like that regularly available, like you just said. But it's on the cusp of, do I recommend that? Yeah.
I'll tell you what I just thought. It sort of feels like the 2 collections that we've reviewed are good companion pieces. Mm-hmm. So, like, say you go down a retro game shop. Yeah. But, like, say you go down a retro game shop and you've got a tenner and EA Replay £7 and the Mega Drive collections £3. Mm-hmm. It seems like you're probably going to get a decent mix of your sort of 16-bit stuff for a tenner.
And that's the thing, isn't it? And we just, bemoaned it a little bit, but we're sat here in a room reviewing it for someone. Ourselves. But yeah, it is, like for £10, if you have a feeling where you go, you can get those 2 games, say, theoretically for £10, that is in, and you get whatever, like 25 games, and of those 25 games, 5 or 6 are very good emulations, and you want to do it that way, then, fair enough. I think if it's the easiest way of doing it, then do it. We probably would just caveat that and say that it probably isn't the easiest way. Certainly for the Mega Drive collection that you've talked about and said, you can get the treasure games that you get on Switch and stuff. But yeah, I mean, just thinking back to those Sonic compilations and stuff, it's really funny just to think that actually, I know we're not reviewing them on this, but the best thing to come out of Sonic in the last sort of 30 years, or what people say the best Sonic game is, Sonic Mania, that's on the Switch. And that isn't even an old Sonic game. It is just a remix. Like a twist on it. And actually, they're damn right. You know what I mean? Like, it just adds in, like, enough differences from the old games, but it's the exact same feel as the old games. And it's like, so, if we're going to say anything, but me personally, I would say go and get Sonic Mania. You know what I mean? Like, even maybe over Origins, I don't know, like, or even over Superstars or Frontiers. Go and pay the £10 to get Mania and play that and see how you get on with that. Because actually, that's more of a compilation for the newer gamer, in a weird way. So yeah, cool. Right, well, thanks very much for listening, guys, and we'll see you again soon.
Cheers.
Bye bye.